My name's Helen Stalford and I'm a Professor of Law at the University of Liverpool, and I've been working on children's rights for about 25 years.
Thank you. So we're just going to start off, Helen, with thinking about if you could kind of describe one particular activity that you've been involved in that's worked with members of the public and what that was and what that involved. That would be great.
So the most recent project that I've been working on is a project called Lives on Hold, Our Stories Told, or LOST for short, which has been looking at the impacts and legacies of COVID for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and young people. So part of that has been around really engaging and training young asylum seekers as peer researchers, but there's also been a big participatory element. So we interviewed 69 young unaccompanied asylum seekers about their experiences, both during and in the aftermath of COVID. So that has also involved a kind of public education element as well, because obviously asylum is a real hot topic politically. There's huge health implications for asylum seekers, both physical and mental health. So we really wanted to engage people with lived experience, both in shaping the design of that project and in helping us to implement it.
And did you meet any kind of resistance? Obviously, young people acting as peer researchers, did you meet any resistance along that journey or any caution from others that might be associated with difficulty?
Yeah, definitely. There's always caution, isn't there? For all of the talk around working with people with lived experience, there's huge difficulties around getting ethical approval for these kinds of projects. Certainly, you know, I'm an established researcher. I've got a good relationship with our ethics committee, but trying to, even for us, push a project through that involves direct work with some of the most vulnerable children and young people is really challenging. And we end up in a situation where people just don't do that much meaningful participatory work, and certainly not as peer researchers with the most vulnerable groups because they can't get ethical approval. And then it becomes an ethical issue in itself because we're not researching the people that most need to be researched in the way that we know most need to research with them. So we've been trying to kind of reframe the discussion around ethics and say, you know, it's ethical to do this research, it's unethical to avoid it. How do we create the conditions in which we can keep people safe and empower them to do this kind of research? So that's where a lot of our focus has been in the last couple of years.
That sounds really interesting, and I think those challenges with gaining ethical approval, I think, is often the experience of working more collaboratively with kind of children and young people. You talked about kind of like meaningful involvement of those peer researchers. What has that looked like? What's made it meaningful? Just, I know it's a big project, but just briefly tell us about what makes meaningful participation over something that might be a bit more tokenistic or a bit more kind of not as meaningful.
I think it's such an important question. For me, it's all about building relationship, and not relationship during the course of a funded project or a sort of a scheduled project, but building relationship well before the project even begins. So about a year before we actually even got funding for our project, we were having weekly meetings with these young asylum seekers around the issues that they were facing. And this was even before COVID lockdown really hit. And so we engaged with them through a charity that works directly with these young people, and it was them who approached us to say these young people are really struggling with two things. The first is that they don't feel that they have any voice in any of these debates about young asylum seekers or asylum generally, and the second is that they're so disenfranchised. They can't work, they're under the care of social services, but every bit of their lives is controlled, and they have no financial autonomy, they have no social autonomy, they have no legal autonomy. And so they would really like to talk about ways of giving them voice, but also campaigning for more financial kind of security and rights. So these are the two big kind of priorities for them. We started to talk about how do we construct a project with all of that in mind, methodologically and substantively. And we thought, we could apply for funding for this project, but how do we pursue this sort of work even without funding? And so so we really worked with them to shape the questions that we would be asking, who we'd be asking, and how we'd be asking those questions. Sorry, did you lose me for a minute? You okay? Yeah.
No,
Okay.
no, that's great.
So we really we worked up a kind of proposal as to how we could do this work even on a shoestring budget using our kind of university resources, and then we applied for funding. In the hope that we would get it, but that was a kind of additional extra, if you like, and we did. We got significant funding from the ESRC to do it. So that was what made it meaningful, is that they were involved in helping us to identify the questions, not just providing us with the sort of responses as participants.
I think often the kind of the timescales of funding can often constrain meaningful engagement, and I think certainly a theme coming up from these interviews has been that sustained relationships was really important for that to be meaningful, for public advisors to trust strange researchers who they don't know and have no kind of ongoing relationship with.
Absolutely, we need to be creating a kind of research community where they are part of the research, they are embedded in that research community as a kind of normal feature of our consultation, in the same way that we would with any fellow academic. You don't need funding projects to do that. That's a normal part of our everyday life. And so we had weekly meetings with them online during COVID. We had a few sort of set face-to-face meetings with them. We went on a research retreat with them. We went on a research meeting with them 2 weeks ago for 2 days, and they're coming back up to Liverpool at the end of this month. So it was having those kind of opportunities for really regular discussion, but just getting to know each other as individuals. That's what makes it meaningful.
I think often sometimes that kind of public consultation can have a real rigid structure to it, that we go in with an agenda, we go in with what we think we need in order to write a research proposal or an application, and I think sometimes the most meaningful involvement wanders and takes shape along the way.
Absolutely, and I think one of the other things that we've really focused on in the last, say, 5 years or so was creating adult-free spaces for them to set agendas. So, because I think as established researchers and as adults generally, we just cannot help but dictate the direction of the discussion and the focus of the discussion. And so to even just give a bit of context to, this is the kind of thing that we're interested in, this is the theme of what we're discussing, but we want you to go away now and set your own agenda for research or for a campaign or whatever it is, and creating as many opportunities for adult-free or researcher-free spaces for them. It just yields things that we would never have even thought about. So, for instance, our University Young Persons Advisory Group always creates adult-free opportunities now for young people to consider specific issues. And then once they've had a chance to talk to each other and bounce off each other, then they come back into the kind of adult space, if you like, and share that.
And do you feel that in those, so you talked about the youth advisory panel there, do you feel that kind of consultation works as a model, or do you think there's different ways that we should be working to consult based on young people's preferences and situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends, doesn't it? But I definitely the establishment of the University Young Persons Advisory Group was a bit of a game changer for us, I think. A, because it's properly resourced and we pay our young people for their time, but B, because we can really build their capacity and confidence to contribute meaningfully. Like just this kind of ad hoc consultation with people is really unsettling. It takes a while for any of us to develop those skills, and not just fluency, but the confidence really to be able to feel that your opinion really matters and that it's going to be acted upon. And so with our young persons advisory group, we've got we've got about 20, a pool of about 20 young people from all sorts of different backgrounds in it. And we have a WhatsApp group with them. But there's about a core group of 10 who regularly come to our meetings to discuss different research projects from across the university. And some of those are health projects and some of those are not health projects. But they know each other, they know us. We do good fun things with them as well. We celebrate everything that they do, and it's had a massive impact, not just on the research and the quality of the research at different stages, but on their lives. So a lot of the kids that we engage with, they would never have even thought about going to university, but having that exposure to and relationship with people within the university has given a significant proportion of them that confidence to apply to go to university. And kind of it's changed the kind of course of their life for some of them. So it's that kind of personal impact of the research as well as the impact on the research itself.
I think that's really interesting and certainly matches kind of my experience of working with young people. It just can open up opportunities, and just generally young people are not used to having their opinions sought authentically, and actually someone doing something with that, I think it is quite empowering. So listening to the range of work that you've been involved with, Helen, what do you think is kind of some of the biggest barriers, big challenges in doing the work and engaging meaningfully with kind of members of the public for research?
Well, as far as children and young people are concerned, it's just trying to find those appropriate channels to identify how to communicate with them and how to identify the best people, I guess, who are going to be interested in the project, but also have something meaningful to say about it. So establishing those relationships with good gatekeepers, I think, is a real challenge. Because gatekeepers are often civil society organisations or incredibly busy people who they're not paid to be our gatekeepers necessarily. They're not. It's an add-on. So we have to invest properly in properly resourcing those strategic relationships with those people and making sure that we're not undermining their work in any way, that we're properly enhancing their work. So, for instance, we work with loads of charities and access different youth groups through charities, but we also work with children outside of mainstream school and children in mainstream school. So that's the first thing, and then just trying to, it's the age-old thing around that, the harder to reach children and young people who aren't engaged in any of these different organisations. How do we give them a voice? And I think that's where peer researchers are incredibly helpful. So if we can train people with lived experience who are in the same age group or communities, then they have that inroads into those kinds of groups that we wouldn't, and who wouldn't really be that interested in talking to us directly. So that is also really helpful. And I think the third thing is just being like we've talked a little bit about ethics as being an issue. If you can overcome ethics, I think one of the things that we've been really aware of in this recent project with asylum seekers is going beyond ethics and thinking about a trauma-informed approach to our research. And the fact that, especially if we're working with very vulnerable people who have experienced and are experiencing a lot of trauma, how do we learn from that community of practice around a trauma-informed approach and bring that into our research methods? So it's not just things like confidentiality, consent, safeguarding, referral to services. I think what we've decided with this project is that we need to really think about how we're caring for our participants. How are we timing even our consultation with them? My husband's bringing me coffee. How are we timing our consultation with them in a way that is sensitive to how they've slept and when they're eating and what they're eating, and things like Ramadan and fasting periods, and when we're understanding a trauma-informed approach, do we understand how trauma is manifested in their lives? So, for instance, asylum-seeking children, we know that they've experienced trauma before they arrived in the UK, but we know that they experienced trauma at the hands of the UK hostile environment, the asylum system. But we also know that they don't express that trauma in ways that maybe some Western children might, or children in the UK might, because they just don't have that culture of mental health disclosure, if you like. And so being able to contextualize trauma in a really sort of specific way is a really key part of it. And then nurturing relationships and trust are also a really important part of a trauma-informed approach, which don't appear in a really explicit way within an ethics framework. So just attending to things like, really regular meetings where we are talking about things other than just the research. We're talking about them, their interests, their needs, getting to know them and them getting to know us on a really personal basis. And also having that built-in counselling and therapeutic support built into a project rather than just as a referral to a service. We think that that's really critical for especially things like mental health related work, where, whether you like it or not, bringing people with lived experience into a project where it's constantly dragging them back into that world is traumatic. It can be so traumatic. And so we need that kind of therapeutic support to sit within research projects and not just be a sort of add-on referral.
I think it's really interesting to hear you talk, Helen, because I think sometimes one of the queries that we'll have from maybe our postgraduate research students or someone that's kind of new to public advice, working with members of the public, would be, do I need ethical approval to do PPI? Do I need ethical approval to be able to go and consult with members of the public? And whilst the answer to that is normally kind of no, it doesn't mean that you don't work ethically. It's still you're still bound by ethical principles that stretch outside the forms and the pieces of paper and the very kind of strict relationships that you'll have as part of a research participant. But working with members of the public, I really like the idea of this kind of wider caring relationship that you have with members of the public that you are working with, that whilst it might not have a form and an approval number, is really important.
Yeah, and that's, people like to feel cared for, don't they? They immediately, relationship is the foundation of everything. And in the sense, the children's rights scholar, like you, children's rights has been the kind of bedrock of everything, but that relational approach is so kind of critical, isn't it? If, there's no point in having rights if we don't have relationships. And so while we would never want to kind of do away with a rights framework, we need to invest in some of the softer stuff around care, trust, dignity. And I think you can do that in all sorts of ways, but showing that public participants or public involved people that you just really care and you're really invested is massively important.
And so kind of lastly, so interesting kind of hearing you talk. I could just keep going and going and going, but from my perspective, kind of in the way that we're working with members of the public has changed in the mainstream quite a lot over the last 10 years. We're in a different place than maybe we were 10 years ago. Ideally, where would you like to see, as kind of researchers, particularly working with children and young people, how would you like to see that develop further over the next kind of 10 years?
I think we need to create much more opportunities for young people to set research agendas. I think we need a much more routine consultation with them around the questions that we should be asking and where we should be focusing our priorities. So that's the first thing. And having some institutionalized young persons advisory group that is embedded in sort of our research strategies as well, I think would be fantastic. I think as well we've invested a lot in our participatory projects, and but then we sort of abandon those once the projects come to an end. And if we can do some work around skilling up young researchers so that they can pivot to all sorts of different projects as skilled early researchers, so that we really think about early career researchers at school level rather than just at sort of postgraduate level, that I think would help to sort of almost create a really helpful kind of career path, and, you know, just validate some of the skills and experience that these young people are bringing to these initiatives. So whether there could be some embedded in some kind of school level qualification or something, a young researchers sort of program, I think would really help to sort of change this culture.
Amazing. Thank you, Helen. Thank you. So thank you so much for sparing time to talk with us. Really, really appreciate it. Listening to a wide variety of kind of engagement and consultation and involvement and participation approaches. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Lucy. Good luck with the project. Huh?
Thank you.